wanted to be with him, as if being with John F. Kennedy could add something important to their lives. I'm Nancy Dickerson, and the program is Being with John F. Kennedy. In the next 2 hours, you're going to be closer to John F. Kennedy and his story than any audience was during his lifetime. This look at JFK is possible because of Kennedy's interest in a new form of history, a candid film journalism that was beginning just as his campaign was getting underway. He agreed to let special cameras and sound equipment follow him closely during the campaign and in the Oval Office because he thought that they would provide a new kind of record, a record so that people in the future could look back and see history more directly for themselves. Now, 20 years after his death, those films have been edited together with other films from the time to give you this view of what it was like being with John F. Kennedy. Being with means that for the most part you will be moving along with JFK, seeing and hearing for yourself, not commentary, gossip, or theories of conspiracy, but John F. Kennedy the man, as he seizes the presidency and struggles to meet its challenges. We start with JFK as a young senator, near the beginning of his run for the presidency in the Wisconsin primary, 1960.
And he taught me one sentence: yes to post and yes be near one.
Ladies and gentlemen, I first of all want to express my appreciation to all of you. I know you've been standing for quite a few minutes, so I've been standing for 3 months, so I know how tough it is.
I have been standing for 3 months. Running hard is what he means. This is a primary that could make or break his drive for the presidency. He and his family have been crisscrossing the freezing Wisconsin landscape, trying to warm voters to his candidacy. It is the farmers and small-town people of Wisconsin Kennedy will have to persuade first. Persuade against an opponent who is one of them, a friendly senator from next door, Minnesota, Hubert Humphrey.
Mr. Humphrey, I hope you get good luck. Thank you so much, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you very, very much.
Sure. We'll see you tomorrow.
You betcha. I'll be listening in tomorrow.
You gotta get in, buddy. I'm going to see you, by God.
So you come on down to the White House for a cup of coffee, huh? Okay.
Everything's nuts.
Yeah, good.
Good morning. First, let me thank you for joining us for a cup of coffee today. We hope that the next 30 minutes will be pleasant ones for you. My husband will be here in a few minutes, and if you've any questions you would like to ask him, we have set up telephones to receive your calls.
We talk a good deal about liberty and equality, but I think there's still a good deal to be done here in this country. There are still millions of Americans who are denied an opportunity to vote, to go to schools on an equal basis. I think we can do more to make our own society more perfect, and in that way hold up an image around the world that we are the court, the defenders of freedom. We believe in it, we practice it, and then we can hope others will follow us.
As a Catholic, wouldn't the Pope or the bishop or the priest be telling you what to do if you became president? They would not. They would not attempt to tell me what to do, and if they did, I would tell them that they were not entitled to tell me what to do. I believe in the First Amendment, which provides for a separation of church and state. This is a strongly held conviction, whether I sit in the office of the presidency or in the United States Senate. I fought in the Navy for 4 years. I was in the hospital as a result for 2 years. My brother was killed in the war. My sister's husband was killed in the war. I'm a strong believer in the United States and the United States Constitution, and I will fulfill my oath of office wherever I sit.
Kennedy, of course, is a Roman Catholic, Humphrey a Congregationalist, and Nixon a Quaker, and some observers think that the election has resolved into a religious struggle. That religious thing is just... It's really a breaks your wide apart. See, it makes religion to be of disproportionate importance. Imagine being put a front-page story when under ordinary conditions it wouldn't have been even be put in the paper.
It's undone.
Exactly. I see it every week.
I see it every week.
And so these voters in Milwaukee know what Kennedy means when he says, "I've been standing for 3 months." It's Kennedy's last rally to whip up the big city vote he needs.
This is the key office, and I run for the presidency because, like you, I have strong ideas about what this country must do. I have strong ideas about the United States, playing a great role in a historic moment, when the cause of freedom is endangered all over the world, when the United States stands as the only sentry at the gate, when we can see the campfires of the enemy burning on distant hills. In the coming months and years, all of us as Americans are going to be called out of the ranks. Our courage is going to be tested, and I am confident that we are going to give the same affirmative answer. That's what I think this election is about. That's what we're going to begin to do on next Tuesday. Thank you.
My mother couldn't be here tonight. And I'm sorry that my sister Patrick, and my sister Eunice, and my sister Jean, and my brother-in-law Peter Lawford, or my brother Teddy, or my cousin Joe Gargan, my cousin... So you're going to have to settle with me. Thank you very much.
Just said I was trying to be nominated. If I lost here, I'd find it extremely difficult to nominate. I don't care whether they print it or not.
Now you just go on. The third, we have a chance in. But just a chance, it really depends on the cost. The 10th, we have a chance in.
I'm now saying that Humphrey possibly may carry 5 districts. But it's now clear that the chances of a Kennedy sweep have almost slipped away, that it could be a long night for newspaper and radio men covering the election, and that one of the most elaborate and intense campaigns in the state's history could wind up meaning almost nothing.
So that actually the 20.5 to 10.5 would be a 2-to-1 victory for Jack on delegate. Would be a great victory, actually. How has the vote, as it's been thus far, shaped up according to your expectations?
Well, I was hopeful we could take 6 districts, and I think we have a good chance to do that, which will give us, and I hope in the majority of the popular vote, which will give us a very good result.
What are your plans after tonight?
Well, I continue on, and the next primary, of course, is Indiana, and then I hit West Virginia.
The vote in Wisconsin was inconclusive, but Kennedy's win in West Virginia was decisive. And after he had won the rest of the primaries, he became the man to beat.
Last Saturday, one of our most dedicated and courageous presidents gave the nation his views on the forthcoming Democratic Convention. Inasmuch as Mr. Truman's remarks were directed at me, I am taking this opportunity to respond to his statement.
Senator, are you certain that you're quite ready for the country, or the country is ready for you, in the role of president in January 1961?
In response, let me say, I do not intend to step aside at anyone's request. I was the only candidate to risk my chances in all the primaries, the only one to visit every state. I have encountered and survived every kind of hazard and opposition, and I do not intend to withdraw my name now on the eve of the convention.
Do you give your opponents a chance of blocking your nomination at Los Angeles?
Yes.
Who will do it and how?
Well, I don't expect it's going to happen, but I certainly believe there's a chance that it will happen. There always is. This is an open convention.
Who is your strongest competitor at the convention, Senator Kennedy?
I think Senator Johnson has the most pledged votes.
But I must say, I've done the best I can. I've been running for many months, and if I'm unsuccessful, I will support strongly Senator Johnson if he's nominated. And I must say, I feel that he'll do the same thing. But one of us will have won by then, and one of us will have lost. I think he does the best he can, and so am I.
6 days and nights I had to deliver a quorum of 51 men on a moment's notice to keep the Senate in session to get any bill at all. And I'm proud to tell you that on those 50 quorum calls, Lyndon Johnson answered every one of them. Men who would be president on a civil rights platform answered none. Admittedly, I didn't have the problem that some of my people had of opposing Senator Humphrey Morse in 4 primaries. Senator Johnson, let me just say that I appreciate what Senator Johnson had to say. He made some general references to perhaps the shortcomings of other presidential candidates, but as he was not specific, I assume he was talking about some of the other candidates and not about me. So I come here today full of admiration for Senator Johnson, full of affection for him, strongly in support of him for majority leader, and I'm confident that in that position, we're all going to be able to work together. Thank you.
John F. Kennedy.
Mr. Chairman, Wyoming's vote will make a majority for Senator Kennedy. And I can assure all of you here who have reposed this confidence in me that I will be worthy of your trust. We will carry the fight to the people in the fall, and we shall win. And I am grateful, finally, that I can rely in the coming months on many others, on a distinguished running mate who brings unity and strength to our platform and our ticket, Lyndon Johnson. On my traveling companion in Wisconsin and West Virginia, Senator Hubert Humphrey. And on that fighting campaigner whose support I now welcome, President Harry Truman. I feel a lot safer with all of them on my side.
It's a quick switch as Lyndon Johnson adapts to his new role as candidate for vice president.
I'm always going to stand beside and behind my leader.
On the prospect of the presidency, Kennedy was asked, "Don't you have the feeling that this is perhaps a task that no man can carry?"
Well, I think in the great sense, no man can carry it because the responsibilities of the presidency are unequal. But men are going to have to carry it. And we know who the candidates are.
Two candidates, two characters, two campaign styles.
Which of the two candidates for the presidency, which of the two candidates for the vice presidency can best give America and the free world the leadership that will keep the peace without surrender and extend freedom throughout the world? Which party can lead this country to a position of preeminence in the world? What we are speaks louder than what we say. What we're doing here carries its imprint across the face of the globe. I am tired of reading what Khrushchev is doing. I would like the people of the world to be reading what the American president is doing. He said, I am tired of reading in the paper what Mr. Khrushchev is doing. I am tired of reading in the paper what Mr. Castro is doing. He says, I want to be able to read in the paper what the President of the United States is doing. Well, just let me say this. If he had stopped talking and started reading, he'd find out what President Eisenhower is doing. Let me close by saying to you, I'm doing the work, and if, when I stop, you have to go to school, and then you have to work again. In any case, I want to express my thanks to you all. He said, you know, if I'm elected president, I'll consult with President Eisenhower about how to stop this slump. He'll have a chance to consult with Eisenhower, but he'll be a senator of the United States and not president of the United States. I did not invent the fact that our steel capacity today is moving ahead and being used at only 50% of capacity. I did not invent the fact that there's $9 billion worth of surplus food stored away in this rich country of ours, and farm income has dropped 25% in the last 8 years? And a Gallup poll taken last February in 9 of 10 countries showed that a majority of people thought that the Soviet Union would be first in science in 1970 and first in military power. I did not invent it, Mr. Nixon. The facts are there. It has been achieved, this image of America, during an administration in which you have claimed to be a partner. And as a citizen of the United States, I believe it's time for a change.
And may I say, I am sick and tired of hearing my opponent run down the President of the United States and his administration. Oh, I know. After he hits him below the belt, he says, oh, I didn't do it. I didn't mean Eisenhower. I meant Nixon.
Can you state as evasively as Nixon would under the circumstances which state, Kentucky or Massachusetts, produces the most beautiful women?
Taking a leaf out of the Vice President's book, my wife comes from New York, and therefore I would say that New York produces the most beautiful.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. This is the first time I've ever been any place before my husband, and he's been late. And as I don't have any speech prepared, I think I can tell you who I'm for in November, and I hope all you are. Thank you.
I remember reading when I was at school, when Governor Lehman was running for his third term as governor, that in a rally at Madison Square Garden, when Franklin Roosevelt was running for his second term, that some garment workers unfolded a great sign which said, "We love him for the enemies that he's made." Well, I've been making some good enemies lately, which is
This week, I had the opportunity to debate with Mr. Nixon. I feel that I should reveal that I had a great advantage in that debate, and I'm not referring to anyone's makeup man.
John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon met head-on in the first televised debate. A pressure cooker that had Nixon perspiring and pale under the lights and left Kennedy joking about Nixon's need for a makeup man. But the debates were a serious matter, and for many, they became the campaign. As the pressures built, in 4 debates in a period of 1 month, Kennedy made campaign promises that any president would find difficult to keep.
Looking right at the camera here. Do that again. Take it again. Can you look this way through your
I leave at first thing in the morning.
Mr. Vice President, Mr. Kennedy, would you mind looking around here a second? Thanks very much.
We discussed tonight domestic issues, but I would not want that to be any implication to be given that this does not involve directly our struggle with Mr. Khrushchev for survival.
There is no question but that this nation cannot stand still, because we are in a deadly competition. A competition not only with the men in the Kremlin, but the men in Peking.
I'm not satisfied when the Soviet Union is turning out twice as many scientists and engineers as we are. I'm not satisfied when many of our teachers are inadequately paid, or when our children go to school part-time shifts. I think we should have an educational system second to none.
we are for programs in addition, which will see that our medical care for the aged is much better handled than it is at the present time.
If you feel that everything that is being done now is satisfactory, that the relative power and prestige and strength of the United States is increasing in relation to that of the communists, then I agree. I think you should vote for Mr. Nixon. But if you feel that we have to move again in the 60s, that the function of the president is to set before the people the unfinished business of our society, as Franklin Roosevelt did in the 30s, the agenda for our people. If we fail to move ahead, if we fail to develop sufficient military and economic and social strength here in this country, then I think that the tide could begin to run against us.
Mr. Nixon said yesterday that the members of the Democratic Party should not go around the country saying the country is weak because it will give Mr. Khrushchev encouragement. I want to make it clear that nothing that I'm saying will give Mr. Khrushchev the slightest encouragement.
When he makes statements like this, what does this do to American prestige? Well, it can only have the effect, certainly, of reducing it. Let me make one thing clear. Senator Kennedy has a responsibility to criticize those things that are wrong, but he has also a responsibility to be right in his criticism. Every one of these items that I've mentioned, he's been wrong, dead wrong.
I really don't need Mr. Nixon to tell me about what my responsibilities are as a citizen. I've served this country for 14 years in the Congress, and before that in the service. I have just as high a devotion, just as high an opinion. What I downgrade, Mr. Nixon, is the leadership the country's getting, not the country. Now, I didn't make most of the statements that you said I made. I believe the Soviet Union is first in outer space. We may have made more shots, but the size of their rocket thrust and all the rest. You yourself said to Khrushchev, you may be ahead of us in rocket thrust, but we're ahead of you in color television, in your famous discussion in the kitchen. I think that color television is not as important as rocket thrust. Secondly, I didn't say we had the worst slums in the world. I said we had too many slums, and they are bad, and we ought to do something about them. And we ought to support housing legislation, which this administration has opposed. I didn't say we had the worst education in the world. What I said was that 10 years ago, we were producing twice as many scientists and engineers as the Soviet Union, and today they're producing twice as many as we are, and that this affects our security around the world.
The debates helped Kennedy, and his crowds doubled overnight. But he measured every good sign against the increasing attacks on his religion. He thought he had beat the Catholic issue in the primaries, but when it continued to haunt, even jeopardize all that he did, Kennedy made what he considered a crucial win-or-lose step in the campaign, an appearance before the Protestant ministers' meeting in Houston.
But if this election is decided on the basis that 40 million Americans lost their chance of being president on the day they were baptized, then it is the whole nation that will be the loser in the eyes of Catholics and non-Catholics around the world, in the eyes of history, and in the eyes of our own people. But if, on the other hand, I should win this election, then I shall devote every effort of mind and spirit to fulfilling the oath of the presidency. Practically identical, I might add, with the oath I have taken for 14 years in the Congress. For without reservation, I can, and I quote, solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, so help me God.
A campaign promise is hardly regarded as an oath, but Kennedy made his promises with such fervor that they would not soon be forgotten by himself or his opponents.
But I hope the next administration, and if I have anything to do with it, the next administration will, make one last great effort to provide for control of nuclear testing, control of nuclear weapons, if possible, control of outer space, free from weapons, and also to begin again the subject of general disarmament levels.
If we are elected, every American man or woman who seeks to work will find it in a growing and expanding economy. And if we are elected, every American, regardless of his race or his creed or his color, will be given his full constitutional rights.
University, John F. Kennedy made an historic promise to commit the American presidency behind equality as a moral issue.
This is a place preeminently for moral leadership, as Franklin Roosevelt said. And I believe if the President of the United States indicates his strong support of the extension of equal constitutional rights to all Americans, wherever they may live, if he stands strongly behind the principle of equality of opportunity for education and employment, I believe that this country then will recognize the moral imperative.
What could you do? Senator Kennedy and I are candidates for the presidency of the United States. In the years to come, it will be written that one or the other of us was elected, and that he was or was not a great president. What will determine whether Senator Kennedy or I, if I am elected, was a great president? It will not be our ambition that will determine it, because greatness is not something that is written on a campaign poster. It will be determined to the extent that we represent the deepest ideals, the highest feelings and faith of the American people.
Today, not a victory of party, but a celebration of freedom, symbolizing an end as well as a beginning, signifying renewal as well as change. For I have sworn before you and Almighty God the same solemn oath our forebears prescribed nearly a century and 3/4 ago.
Kennedy had addressed his message to America, the emerging nations, and both sides in the Cold War. And the speech rang with a call to service.
The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
Kennedy conjured visions of a more compassionate America and a more decent world. The style and beauty of this day were a preview of what was to come in the Kennedy White House. Fay, wife of the president's old Navy friend from the PT boat days.
For my first visit.
Let's go. The president is organizing a swearing-in ceremony.
I will now and faithfully discharge the duties of office which I am about to undertake. So help me God.
Paul Fay, just sworn in as Undersecretary of the Navy.
That's very nice.
How do you want to do that?
I sent one out to Steve McNichols and told him,
It's too hard to get to turn these out. Now we got one for that. I found myself running with very best wishes.
That is really boring. Well,
That's very much.
The Kennedy style and gaiety lit up the White House, but they would also, as he encountered the problems of the presidency, help raise key questions asked to this day about Kennedy. Was he more style than substance? Were his words only rhetoric, or do they speak with power and meaning to us today? Now, being with the president at work in the White House, you'll be seeing a special kind of evidence on these questions. For Kennedy, as well as for his critics, a first measure of his performance would be the promises that he had made to the American people in the campaign.
How do you do? I see it. It's predominantly Navy, isn't it?
Yeah, there's one from London was by the Philadelphia Maritime Museum. This thing of the Macedonia. United States versus the Macedonia. That comes from the Philadelphia Maritime Museum.
Oh, yes, and I was born for them.
I knew that.
What was that engagement? Macedonian?
1812. These are all the ones we won.
One of Kennedy's most solemn campaign promises was to go after a test ban and disarmament. And as president, he was in a hurry.
Mr. Dean on the nuclear testing, we should have somebody on the disarmament end. What did you reckon about when we would be in some position on disarmament to be able to participate in some negotiations?
I believe we would not be prepared to really move into a serious negotiation with the Soviets, except on a very informal basis, until fall.
Delayed perhaps, but it would not be tolerable for Kennedy to see the promise of a test ban denied.
What sort of a prediction are you going to make on the economy?
Essentially, there's no real change in our appraisal of the current situation. No upturn in sight. And
The president's promise to provide jobs is being frustrated by a recession. Walter Heller, chief of the President's Council of Economic Advisors, has bad news.
I checked the leading indicators, we checked the GNP segments and so forth.
The Federal Reserve say they get any new?
Well, no. As a matter of fact, their index of industrial production is still falling off, but double check.
You want to get a shot of what the economy, of what money's going into the economy from the federal government and being taken in. I'd just like to see what our cash for the next 6 months is going to be.
The president is trying to launch ambitious social programs in line with his campaign promises, but he sees his goals jeopardized not only by a weak economy, but also by problems with Congress. His margin there is slim. Leaders old enough to be his father are reluctant to follow him, and few of them owe him anything. As Attorney General, Robert Kennedy will be enforcing the president's policy on civil rights, the most explosive issue Kennedy faces at home. In the campaign, JFK had promised to commit the moral force of the presidency behind black rights. Now his brother Robert will help him meet the inevitable crises.
Where are we going to send most of them? This is like India.
Third world countries will be receiving volunteers from the Peace Corps, the organization Kennedy is setting up to put into action young Americans inspired by his call to service.
The chiefs just returned from Puerto Rico.
What sort of demonstrations you put on?
There were demonstrations and displays of all the services had down there, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps, and they were really outstanding displays. And followed by flyover by tanker refueling.
Joint Chiefs of Staff command a firepower that is nearly incalculable. So is that of the Soviet Union. One of the president's first tasks is to make his own assessment of the balance of forces and their consequences for troubled spots around the world.
No man entering upon this office, regardless of his party, regardless of his previous service in Washington, could fail to be staggered upon learning, even in this brief 10-day period, the harsh enormities of the trials through which we must pass in the next 4 years. I feel I must inform the Congress that our analysis over the last 10 days make it clear that in each of the principal areas of crisis, the tide of events has been running out, and time has not been our friend.
The Cold War is in full swing, from Laos to the Congo to Europe. The Soviet Union is threatening to make a pact with Communist East Germany that could cut off Berlin. And that could trigger war. And then there is Communist Cuba.
They'll have amphibious landings on the beach, and then tomorrow they have a strike exercise, carrier strike exercise, and then they will be taken down to Panama.
How many countries are represented?
All but Cuba.
Cuba. From his first days in office, the president has been trying to decide what to do with the plan, hatched under Eisenhower by the Central Intelligence Agency, to send an invasion force of exiles into Cuba. The plan is recommended by nearly all the president's advisors. It's supported by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who are waiting for him to decide what to do. Even as Cuban exiles in America campaigned for action, the invasion force was going ashore in Cuba at the Bay of Pigs. The invaders were quickly pinned down and outgunned. They had been promised help from uprisings by the local population, but that never happened. Commanders called for help from U.S. forces, but President Kennedy refused it. The defeat was total, disastrous for the exiles, humiliating for the United States. It was one man who gave the go-ahead, and although experts of both administrations had recommended the invasion, one man who took the blame for the failure. Khrushchev took full advantage of the blunder at the Bay of Pigs to rage against the United States and its president. Castro exulted at his victory.
In view of the fact we're taking a propaganda lambasting around the world, why is it not useful, sir, for us to explore with you the real facts behind this? Or
Kennedy talked about all this to an audience of newspaper publishers.
This administration intends to be candid about its errors. For as a wise man once said, an error doesn't become a mistake until you refuse to correct it. We intend to accept full responsibility for our errors, and we expect you to point them out when we miss them.
Each of these
Mr. President, honored delegates, ladies and gentlemen, today every inhabitant of this planet must contemplate the day when this planet may no longer be habitable. Every man, woman, and child lives under a nuclear sword of Damocles, hanging by the slenderest of threads, capable of being cut at any moment by accident or miscalculation or by madness. The weapons of war must be abolished before they abolish us. It is therefore our intention to challenge the Soviet Union not to an arms race, but to a peace race, to advance together, step by step, stage by stage, until general and complete disarmament has been achieved. I therefore propose, on the basis of this plan, that disarmament negotiations resume promptly and continue without interruption until an entire program for general and complete disarmament has not only been agreed upon, but has been actually achieved. Together we shall save our planet, or together we shall perish in its flames. Save it we can, and save it we must. And then shall we earn the eternal thanks of mankind, and as peacemakers, the eternal blessing of God.
Was it style or substance Kennedy offered the United Nations, whose words speak to us today? His words then spoke to the fears and hopes of the world. Since that time, those fears have grown. The words still relevant. As for substance, this speech did not reopen negotiations for a test ban. But these words, together with his stand in Berlin, marked a slow turn in Soviet attitudes that would have an important result later in Kennedy's administration. Kennedy initiated the live presidential news conference. He enjoyed the challenge of those meetings, so did the press, and so did his opposition, as the president was held to account for his campaign policies.
When we talk about 5.5 million people unemployed, there are still over 60 million people employed. And I think that may be one of the reasons why there is some feeling that I overstress the dark instead of the bright in my State of the Union address. But it is the function, it seems to me, of the president to concern himself with that 5.5 million unemployed, particularly when so many have been unemployed for such a long period of time.
Kennedy flooded Congress with bills on domestic affairs. But Congress was slow to act. So the president went to the people who could influence Capitol Hill.
We need a permanent unemployment insurance program so that those who want to work and can't find a job will not be shifted and living on a marginal income without hope for themselves.
And this year we shall pass, I believe, we shall pass medical care for the aged beside the Social Security. Harry Truman once said there are 14 or 15 million Americans who have the resources to have representatives in Washington to protect their interests. And that the interests of the great mass of the other people, the 150 or 60 million, is the responsibility of the President of the United States, and I propose to fulfill it.
We prepare, sir, to evaluate for us the quality of congressional support the administration's domestic program is getting at the present time.
The president was hesitant to blame the congressman for the slow action on his domestic programs in Congress because he needed their votes.
I think we've secured the passage of important legislation already. And when we signed the other day the pension welfare bill, one the week before the manpower training, we have, I hope, passed good bills in the House and Senate on higher education.
One domestic program for which Kennedy found enthusiastic support was his bold effort to leapfrog the Russian achievements in space. Rice University in Texas.
But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon.
Now, you have made efforts on behalf of others. What have you done for the women according to the promises of the platform?
Well, I'm sure we haven't done enough, and I must say I am a strong believer in equal pay for equal work, and I think that we ought to do better than we're doing, and I'm glad that you reminded me of it, Mr. President.
At the same time that militant feminists were complaining about a lack of female rights, a First Lady was brightening the White House with a personal taste and sense of style that dazzled the country. Guests at the White House included the usual heads of state, diplomats and politicians, but also scientists, scholars, and artists. Cellist Pablo Casals, who for decades had refused to come to the States, was glad to visit and play for the Kennedys. When the president traveled to Latin America, Jacqueline attracted as much attention as he. Kennedy had established an alliance for progress to improve relations with Latin countries. He had come to see the Venezuelan farmers receive grants of land being distributed under his program. But it is Jacqueline who does most to improve relations this day.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. President, one of the Kennedys does not need an interpreter, so I'd like to have my wife say just a word to you.
Estoy segura que con vuestra colaboración tendrá éxito. Hasta luego, gracias.
The practice of managed news is attributed to your administration. Mr. Salinger says he's now had it defined. Will you give us your definition and ask us why you find it necessary to practice it?
You are charging us with something, Miss Gray, and then you're asking me to define what it is you're charging me with. I think you might. Let me just say that we've had very limited success in managing the news, if that's what we've been trying to do. And perhaps you tell us what it is that you object to in our treatment of the news.
Are you asking me?
Yes.
Well, I don't believe in managed news at all. I thought we ought to get everything we want.
Well, I think you should too, Miss Gray. I'm for that.
The president got his news from the press, television, and his own intelligence services. In September 1962, the press was reporting the presence of offensive Russian missiles in Cuba. If this were true, Kennedy would be facing a showdown with Khrushchev involving nuclear arsenals and the threat of nuclear war. On October 16, U.S. aerial photographs showed the president hard evidence of nuclear missile installations on Cuban soil. 2 days later, the Russian foreign minister, Andrei Gromyko, looked the president in the eye and assured him that there were no such Soviet missiles in Cuba. Faced with the Russian lie and proof of the missile installations, the president ordered a quarantine of Cuba that would halt Soviet ships at sea, and he demanded removal of the missiles by the Soviet Union.
Our resolution will call for the prompt dismantling and withdrawal of all offensive weapons in Cuba under the supervision of UN observers before the quarantine can be lifted.
Really rejected Kennedy's demands, and the threat of nuclear war escalated. But as more messages were exchanged, Soviet ships headed for Cuba suddenly stopped, then turned around. After 4 days, Khrushchev accepted Kennedy's terms. The missiles disappeared, and they were photographed on Soviet ships headed back to Russia. In the eyes of the world, Khrushchev had backed down. It was a major victory for Kennedy, and people everywhere breathed more easily.
In this week of Thanksgiving, there is much for which we can be grateful. As we look back to where we stood only 4 weeks ago, the unity of this hemisphere, the support of our allies, and the calm determination of the American people, these qualities may be tested many more times in this decade, but we have increased reason to be confident that those qualities will continue to serve the cause of freedom with distinction in the years to come.
Mr. President, your policies in Europe seem to be encountering great difficulty, sir. There's some impression and talk in town and the country that your administration seems to have lost its momentum and to be slowing down and moving on to the defensive. I wonder if you could comment on this.
Yes, I've read that, and I'm sure I think there is a rhythm to personal and national and international life, and it flows and ebbs, and I would say that we have a good many difficulties at home and abroad, and the Congress has not acted yet on the programs we've sent forward.
Mr. President, do you think that Mrs. Murphy should have to take into her home a lodger whom she does not want, regardless of her reason, or would you accept a change in the Civil Rights Bill to accept small boarding houses like Mrs. Murphy?
The question would be, it seems to me, Ms. Gregg, whether Mrs. Murphy had a substantial impact on interstate commerce.
The most difficult problem for Kennedy coming up in Congress was to get a civil rights bill. At the same time demonstrations were exploding in many areas, action on civil rights in Congress had been opposed by senior Southerners, the same leaders Kennedy needed to pass his other domestic legislation. For some time, black leaders had been accusing Kennedy of not keeping his campaign promise. One spring day in 1963, the Attorney General, Robert Kennedy, arrived at the White House with a crisis decision for the President to make.
I talked to General Abrams about getting these people. I thought that we'd come up with a plan about how we're going to handle the governor. I don't like the idea of picking him up.
All right, then the court might order that he step aside.
But the court's already ordered that.
Well, then what would they do then? They wouldn't order him.
It's the president's responsibility to see that a federal court order is carried out. An order directing Alabama Governor George Wallace to admit black students to the state university. Wallace has vowed to defy the court order. He said he'll stand in the schoolhouse door and block their entry.
Next question, which we can take up now, Mr. President, whether you're going to make a nationwide TV address in connection with this session.
I didn't think so. It just really depends on whether we have something trouble on the university, then I would. But otherwise, I didn't think that we would at this point.
Situation. I think it would be helpful even if we don't have the problem in Alabama. I think it would take away a lot of the problems that we're having at the present time.
It's going to be helpful to legislate.
You mean in the legislature?
Yeah, I don't. Legislators are hurt. What's more?
Why?
I think you get to the real nut cutting of this thing on the Hill, and that's when you may want to do this.
Well, and then you're going to have, that's not going to be September, October, November. And I don't think you can get by now without having a address on television, at least during this period of time, giving some direction and having it in the hands of the president.
Larry O'Brien, who's in charge of the president's relations with Congress, argues that a strong speech by the president favoring desegregation could hurt rather than help get civil rights legislation.
Anyway, let's pass on now. I think we're going to get something ready anyway because it may be there tomorrow.
Well, we got a draft which doesn't fit all these points, but it's something to work with, and there's some pretty good sentences and paragraphs.
Then you're going to help us get ready anyway because we may want to do it tomorrow. Okay.
But the president's first problem is how to get two black students, Vivian Malone and James Hood, into the University of Alabama.
And then if he still refuses, then Nick Katzenbach will say that we got this court order and we have to go through on legal basis. He's made the test. This matter should be determined in courts. It shouldn't be determined out here. He's had this opportunity and should let him go through, or otherwise we're going to have to take other steps because these students are going to attend the University of Alabama. Then if he still doesn't move, then we'll try to get by him. Pushing? We're pushing a little bit. Just having somebody stand around and try to walk through the three doors. We're going to try to have somebody inside who will open up one of the other doors so that we can't cover all three doors and just have the girls and the boys just try to go through another door. Anyway, that's going to be up to Nick Katzenbach as to how far we can go in that. If he's able to keep the doors locked and actually keep them out, and it's going to require knocking them down, or some real forceful action, then they will pull away. What we think then is that they'll go to their dormitories and say, we'll work out the registration sometime else. They'll go to their dormitories and...
Are they getting signed?
Yes.
Yeah.
Being turned back by the governor, letting that situation throughout the country and the world for even 24 hours.
All right, well, I don't mind going. Let's go with the guy.
Well, that's that, because what we tried to do, of course, is to put it on his back completely. That we're trying to get this worked out.
Of course, he called up the guy. My entire time, the fact he continues to say that he's called up the guy, which indicates that he thinks the situation is very critical. After all, he called up the guy. I'm therefore to meet my responsibility, prepared for any situation, because if you are, we are going to federalize this guard and so on and so forth. Now, he may announce that in that case he won't be responsible for law and order, but that could come any day. Don't do that. Back to the matter. Then we would have the guard ready. And then we would use...
And I would say to him that you would hope that none of this would be necessary, that he would stay at home, and then your judgment that if he does stay at home, the local police department...
Let me just call Cy Vance and see if there's anything that we could do before 24 hours.
Assuming that we get turned back at 10:30 tomorrow morning, their time, is
there any way that you could get the guard in there, the Tuscaloosa guard in there by 4 o'clock that afternoon? No, we get those 6. That could be run immediately, couldn't it? So that's no problem. But I'd like to have another 400 or 500 in addition to that 600.
So I would think that probably, unless we change, that probably the best thing to do would be to go as scheduled. Just put up with the 24 hours. We would be nationalizing the guard in that period. We can make a speech on television and other actions which would indicate that we are not permitting him to get away with violence. It's inevitable that we're going to be successful. So I would think that that's what we do with that.
And the South next year, will decide who the next president is. Whoever the South votes for will be the president, because you can't win without the South. And you're going to see that the South is going to be against some folks.
Two Kennedy children are visiting their father in his office.
I'm calling up the guard, and he thinks it's a good scheme. He prefers it.
You want to say hello to Carrie?
Yeah. Hi, Carrie. How are you, dear?
How are you doing? Are you at our house?
What?
Are you at our house?
No, I'm not out at your house. I'm way down in the Southland. Way down south. And you know what the temperature is down here? The temperature down here is 98 degrees. You tell your father that. Tell him we're all going to get hardship fed. Take care of you. Sure.
We're all going to get hardship.
We're all going to get what?
Hardship.
Okay, say goodbye. Say goodbye. Say
Goodbye. Goodbye.
hello? Well, listen, Nick, why don't we plan that? And I think, what do you think for...
I'll take the students on. I will leave them in the car, and they will go to their dormitories thereafter.
And then the students will come back and register in the afternoon. I know, and you're going to have to play it a little bit by ear, but I wouldn't take it too... I mean, almost dismiss him as being rather a second-rate figure for you. I mean, he's wasting your time, he's wasting the students' time, and he's caused a big scene up there. And, you know, I'd have that sort of tone of voice. Don't you think? Yeah. All right. Good luck. You'll do well. Fine. You know, it'll work well. Okay. Governor, catch him back.
And I come here to ask you now for an unequivocal assurance that you will permit these students who, after all, merely want an education at the great university...
Well, you make your statement, but we don't need you to make a speech. You make your statement.
I will make my statement, Governor. I was in the process of making my statement. I'm asking from you an unequivocal assurance that you will not bar entry to these students, to Vivian Malone and to James Hood, and that you will step aside peacefully and do your constitutional duty as governor.
As governor and chief magistrate of the state of Alabama, I deem it to be my solemn obligation and duty to stand before you, representing the rights and sovereignty of this state and its peoples. The unwelcomed, unwanted, unwarranted, and force-induced intrusion upon the campus of the University of Alabama, today of the might of the central government, offers frightful example of the oppression of the rights, privileges, and sovereignty of this state by officers of the federal government.
Governor George Wallace of Alabama has stood in the schoolhouse door. He has refused to permit Nicholas Katzenbach, Deputy Attorney General of the United States, and Marshal Peyton Norville, escort the 2 Negro students in to sign up for summer classes.
Mentioned. But, so will you issue the proclamation now and sign it? The executive order, yeah. Right now? Okay.
We are confronted primarily with a moral issue. It is as old as the scriptures and is as clear as the American Constitution. The heart of the question is whether all Americans are to be afforded equal rights and equal opportunities. Whether we are going to treat our fellow Americans as we want to be treated. We face, therefore, a moral crisis as a country and a people. It cannot be met by repressive police action. It cannot be left to increase demonstrations in the streets. It cannot be quieted by token moves or talk. It is a time to act in the Congress, in your state and local legislative body, and above all, in all of our daily lives. This is what we're talking about, and this is a matter which concerns this country and what it stands for. And in meeting it, I ask the support of all of our citizens. Thank you very much.
He was always preoccupied with re-election, and now the time to campaign for a second term was approaching. Congress was passing some of his legislation, but only slowly. Khrushchev was making new threats in Berlin. The Russians continued to poison the atmosphere with their nuclear tests. And in Southeast Asia, a small war was taking a bad turn under the South Vietnamese government.
I don't think that unless a greater effort is made by the government to win popular support, that the war can be won out there. In the final analysis, it's their war. They're the ones who have to win it or lose it. We can help them. We can give them equipment. We can send our men out there as advisors, but they have to win it, the people of Vietnam against the communists. We're prepared to continue to assist them. But I don't think that the war can be won unless the people support the effort. And in my opinion, in the last 2 months, the government has gotten out of touch with the people.